Seymour Hersh is a D.C. investigative journalist and political writer. He wrote recently about the 2013 chemical weapons that were alleged to be done by Bashar Al Assad. He earned his fame back in the late 60s. 1969, he exposed the My Lai massacre. Now, a lot of you don't remember that, but I think that some of you have probably seen the picture of that naked girl running away, screaming and crying, that naked Vietnamese girl. And it's really evocative. It's probably one of the first times that people really got a look at what was going on in Vietnam. And this My Lai massacre, or My Lai massacre, was the mass killing of 350 to 500 unarmed civilians in South Vietnam in 1968, done by U.S. Army soldiers. There was rape, there was mutilation, done by 26 soldiers with a Lieutenant William Calley Jr. Only Calley was convicted, and he got a life sentence for the killing of 22 villagers, but he only served 3.5 years under house arrest. But this article increased the domestic American opposition to the war when the scope of that killing and the cover-up attempts finally got exposed. There were 3 soldiers at that time that tried to stop the massacre from happening, and they were hiding villagers. But those soldiers were actually shunned, amazingly enough, and they were called traitors. They were even called traitors by a U.S. congressman named Mendel Rivers. He was the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, and that's the guy in charge of the war. And only after 30 years, those people were finally recognized as heroes and not as traitors. And one of those guys was awarded a medal posthumously because he died. The other 2 received those medals. For this story, Seymour Hersh received the International Pulitzer Prize for reporting. He also was the guy who broke the 2004 Abu Ghraib scandal. You remember the army soldiers making the Muslims pose, those prisoners pose naked. That was him that broke that story as well. He's won 2 National Magazine Awards, 5 George Polk Awards, and the George Orwell Award. So this guy is no joke, and he's been doing it for a long, long time. And he really knows what he's doing. So that brings us up to date to the 2013 Assad chemical attack. And Hersh did an investigation in that. The New York Times and the mainstream media were pursuing these attacks, and placing the blame at Assad's door immediately. Sound familiar? But since then, the Times has kind of quietly retreated from it. They recently compiled a list of Assad's atrocities. They even had a subcategory for his chemical attacks. And they list them right on down the line of all the things. But one of them was missing. One glaring thing was missing. It was that 2013 sarin chemical attack. Sarin is some nasty stuff, okay? It makes you, when you come into contact with it, your body completely evacuates. You throw up, the other side too. Your skin starts to boil and bubble over. It is horrible stuff, and to see it, the pictures of it firsthand, it's stomach churning. A lot of these pictures that you're seeing recently now, they don't look like that, but we'll get to that in a moment. All of those atrocities they went on down the line, they included even the chlorine attacks that he had, which technically are chemical, but they're for some reason not considered a war crime. Like a barrel bomb is not considered a war crime, but you have to get to a certain level of chemical or a certain level of weapon before they call it a war crime. It's really convoluted and very confusing, the legal structure around weapons being used on civilians. But 2013 is really important because it was the moment when the Western media and Washington basically piled on Obama for not enforcing his red line by launching strikes on Assad because he gassed his own people. The neocons, if those of you who don't know, the new conservatives, new conservatives, and even the liberal interventionists, they all seem to want these strikes at the time when Obama was running things, even at the risk of creating a vacuum, which would allow Al-Qaeda and ISIL to dig deeper. About a month after the 2013 attack story in the New York Times, they backed away and they did this vector analysis. This is where the proof was going to come. But the vector analysis meaning like they were able to determine where the weapons were fired from. So Hersh did his investigation, and he spoke to a lot of people on the ground, and he actually got to take a look at some of those two weapons that were these supposed sarin gas weapons. One of them didn't have sarin gas on it. It was just a bomb. The other one that did have sarin gas, it only had a 2-mile maximum sustained flight, that particular missile. They went through the rubble and they found the mechanism, just like any other investigation would. And, that only had a 2-kilometer range. I think I said mile a minute ago. I meant kilometer. So they had a 2-kilometer range. Where these weapons were said to have been fired from by the mainstream media was a Syrian military base. Both of those weapons, they were saying, came from that base, went to 2 different cities, and those were almost 10 kilometers away. One was south and one was west, and they were both about 10 kilometers away, so neither one of these weapons could actually make the flight. And one of them didn't even have sarin gas in it. So it kind of put a kibosh on this vector analysis proof that the New York Times was looking to get so they could corroborate their story. But that didn't come true, so they kind of quietly backed away from it. They didn't print a retraction, they just kind of stopped talking about it. And eventually the media stopped talking about it altogether, it went away. But you've noticed in the last few days, since this new chemical attack, they are not only piling back on Assad for this current attack, but they're reviving this old 2013 story as well, saying that that's the way it happened. And it's really causing a lot of confusion in the minds of people who only, take small glances at the news. And, when all the news says, hey, it's Assad, he's bombing his own people, then everybody's like, oh, that son of a bitch is at it again. We got to do something about him, Anyway, it just so happens that one of those, the one that actually had the sarin, both of them were the 2 miles away. That vector analysis puts them right in rebel territory. Not Assad, but the people that are fighting against Assad. In a place like that, I don't think they really consider human life that valuable when it comes to getting the direction of the war that they want. Assad firing chemical weapons on his people might seem like obviously it's a terrible thing, but it might seem like it was something that would benefit him, but actually it wouldn't, because it gets different international groups against him. He's already got enough enemies, and everybody wants to usurp him and get him out of there. It would not prove to be in his best interest to do it, but a rebel group firing on its own people, or just civilians that are not in their army, and blaming it on Assad, that would get everybody involved and reignite the war. You see, in the last year, Assad has been doing a pretty good job of reeling in this whole debacle. He's doing a pretty good job of maintaining some semblance of order, and Aleppo been taken back in control of. Mosul is almost there. So Assad is on the verge of victory. He's got Donald Trump saying he's not going to invade. And, it looks like he's not going to lose his position. Why would he fire chemical weapons? It's not going to benefit him. It's going to just make his position much worse. But I believe I've illustrated a way why you would think that it would be beneficial to the rebel forces to keep this fight going. Hersh also found that those chemical weapons came from Turkish intel. The U.S. media denied the story at the time, but later Turkish police have corroborated the story. And this was the 2013 attack. And they corroborated Hersh's findings. Later, the U.S. intel agreed with his findings as well. And that's when the news stopped talking about it. Even though the Times and the media eventually backed off of the story, the Times never retracted the story and allowed the Assad sarin gas story just to fade away and continue to be fact. After this recent attack and all the old stories came back without any real investigation, they put the blame back on Assad within hours, and then tomahawks are flying. When 2013 happened, Obama was on fire about attacking Assad. But then 2 days later, he backed off, which leads me to just speculate here that Obama found out the truth, that it wasn't Assad, and that he really didn't want to start another Iraq debacle. And instead of leaving the onus on himself, saying, I'm going to go in there and get him, he asked Congress, and nobody wanted to go in at the time. The Assad story hadn't been pushed hard enough to get the public behind the invasion, so it just didn't happen. Even Donald Trump himself, the wordsmith that he is, the tweeter-in-chief, put out at least a dozen tweets saying, don't go in, only an idiot would go in, you're just going to mess up this country, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. And all it takes is a couple of beautiful baby pictures, and then Donald Trump is just in there, firing his missiles. Look how big my hands are. Assad has his military. He has the numbers. He has the backing of Iran and Russia. He does not need to do this attack, this recent attack. Assad is a bad guy, and let me just make sure that I reiterate that. I am not saying that Assad is a good guy. I'm just saying that he's holding together this crazy-ass country by threads. He's a dictator, and he's not a good guy. But after Trump let it be known that he has no intention of invading, why is he doing it now? Why would he be attacking his own people? Cui bono? Who benefits? It certainly isn't Assad. You know that we already have 1,000 military advisors there? That's boots on the ground. Since the Tomahawk strike, there are 1,000 more troops. So there's no investigation. Assad's already guilty. Trump's talking about red lines and Obama's failure. Trump has dozens of tweets saying, not to bomb Syria, but now here he is. This story is exactly the same story as Iraq, the weapons of mass destruction. It's the same rush to war. You've got people like Rachel Maddow, who's supposed to be a progressive force, saying Donald Trump better do something about it. You've got Howard Dean saying that we need to go in there. Well, these are people that are supposed to be liberals, and they're just pushing for war. And the Republicans are down for it, and certainly the military-industrial complex. Oh, they want war. Mad Dog Maddox, for God's sakes, he's been talking about invading Iran forever. Oh, he wants to go into Syria. He does. In 2013, John Kerry he had a conversation with a Russian diplomat about these chemical weapons. And, the Russian diplomat said, look, aside from going in and getting into this hot mess, what can Assad do to keep you guys from invading? And he says, tell Assad to give up all of his chemical weapons. He goes, John Kerry's like, I don't think he's going to do it, but just tell him to do that. Within a day, Assad's like, take my chemical weapons, please don't invade us. Just take the chemical weapons. Nobody ever thought he was going to do it, but he did. Russell Goldman of the Times reported more than 100 people have been believed to have been killed, including children, by chemical weapons in a rebel-held town in the Idlib province on Tuesday. U.S. put the blame on Syria government as well as Iran and Russia, saying that this was a war crime, this recent attack. During the war, Assad has been accused of using chlorine gas, which is much less deadly than sarin gas, obviously, and is legal. Like I said, I don't know how the legalities work between the two different gases, but sarin is illegal, chlorine is legal. According to the Violations Documentation Center, which is a not a right or a left-leaning, it's a neutral-leaning group, it says the anti-Syrian government watchdog group says over 1,100 Syrians have been killed by these chemical weapons over the years. And although local medical personnel have the numbers at around several hundred, the numbers seem to have been inflated. Why would Assad risk outside military intervention? You know, he saw what happened with Saddam Hussein, especially when he's so close to winning back his country. Those 2013 attacks, those chemical attacks that I told you about, the vector analysis, the two cities that were hit were in Tarma and Modamina, and this is from the U.S. Selstrom report. UN investigators were tasked to find some of the evidence but did not inspect the sites directly, and they just relied on Assad's enemies' testimony. So they relied on the rebel testimony saying it was Assad. Oh, it wasn't us, it was Assad. One of the chlorine cases, Syrian eyewitnesses testified that the rebels actually staged the attack. In another case, the rebels claimed to know of a barrel bomb that had a chlorine canister in it because the sound it made. I really don't know how that works out, but that's what they say. Sounds like a fake news story. The media never really cited the sources from the UN investigation, just the findings, just that it was a chemical weapon attack. So we're left with the why. This is the last thing Assad would want. But if the U.S. get drawn in to another regime change, it would make more room for the al-Nusra, for the ISIS to rebuild their forces without Assad coming down on them because we're taking him out. We use this same congressional war cry from the original 2013 Iraq invasion. So even asking Congress to fire his missiles, he just fires them. And we're kind of running off of this same, it's all Al-Qaeda, it's all Taliban, so we don't really need another declaration of war. We could just keep running on this war thing. I know that we've seen all those photographs and they look horrible, and I agree. They look terrible, and nobody likes to see dying children. But when you've got somebody like Tulsi Gabbard saying, why don't we wait a few days for a UN investigation? And then you have the other side saying, you're absolutely batshit. We should just fire missiles and kill people. Who seems a little bit more rational to you? I think that knowing a little bit more about what's going on in the country will help you decide what could possibly be done. But do you think that Donald Trump could have listened to this entire story that I've told you? He couldn't have listened to more than 5 minutes before he would have run out of the room. Oh, I need bullet points. I need a graph. Show me a picture. You know, he's never going to be able to grasp all of the nuance. And we have basically put all of these huge weapons in the hands of a child and allow him to do what he will. We are waiting for somebody in power to put him in check. But nobody seems to want to do it. Democrats and Republicans alike seem to want to go to this war. They want to get involved in another, quagmire in the Middle East. And since the media seems to be complicit in just basically being stenographers for the military and for Washington, not really doing any investigation whatsoever, they're just ripping off the bullet points and making people believe that bombing and invading another country is a good thing. We all remember 2003 and the weapons of mass destruction. 2005, we find out that they were non-existent. But yet we were embroiled in that war, and we have yet to leave. And there's no telling when we're going to. Do you really think we need another one of those? Hey, this is Antoinette from Transistor Rodeo. If you like what you saw here, please subscribe for more videos and content. And you can follow me on Twitter at Transistor Rodeo.